Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to folks joining us. We're very excited to have you and looking forward to this session on sustainable development. Before we begin, for those who are joining us for the first time, just a quick housekeeping note. Donc, je ferai ça en français. Donc, vous avez accès aux sessions sous-titrées. Donc, si vous avez besoin d'accès aux sous-titres, vous allez voir sur le bas de votre écran, il y a un bouton qui est écrit Captions, en français sous-titres. Si vous cliquez sur ça, vous pouvez montrer les sous-titres et ensuite, il y a une flèche qui va vers le haut qui va vous permettre d'avoir accès aux traductions sous-titrées. Donc, vous pouvez juste mettre que vous voulez le texte traduit dans la langue de votre choix. So just a quick note that the session is captioned. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says caption. If you click the caption button and you turn it on, you can also click the upward facing arrow and choose the language of your choice for the session. We are taking Q&A as well. So there's a button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. If you click there, you can ask questions during the sessions, and they will be covered by the panelists. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to my colleague, Hilary Grant.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, as Stefan said. My name is Hilary Grant. I'm a board member of ICOMOS Canada. I'll be chairing our session today. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and to learn from our three panelists. I'm joining today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation, also known as Ottawa, Ontario. I have a couple of housekeeping things myself. First, we're going to try a slightly different format today than what you might be used to try to foster some dialogue between our panelists on what is such a crucial topic, World Heritage and sustainable tourism. We're going to run a panel. I'm going to have all three panelists join me shortly, and I'm going to pose 5 questions. The same 5 questions to each panelist, giving them time to respond and build on each other's answers. Afterwards, we will turn to a question and answer period where we'll take questions from the floor. So throughout the session, please don't hesitate to leave questions in the Q&A box that's located at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to them during the question and answer period. So without further ado, I will introduce our 3 esteemed panelists. First, I'm happy to introduce Mr. Fergus McLaren. Fergus is a Canadian sustainable tourism and cultural heritage management professional with 25 years of experience in North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa, with much of his current professional focus involving tourism to World Heritage sites and the implementation of the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals. His background includes a broad range of tourism planning, destination management, and development expertise. His professional experience includes coordinating international meetings and input as the director of the UN-funded International Year of Ecotourism, teaching sustainable tourism at Canada's McGill University, and lecturing on the subject at post-secondary institutions internationally. He currently works in expert and professional capabilities for UNESCO, the UNWTO, the Organization of World Heritage Cities, the World Monuments Fund, the Economic Innovation Institute for Africa, and the Heritage and Cultural Society for Africa. Very busy man. He also has his own private consulting firm, MAC DUFF Tourism Heritage Planning. Next, I'm thrilled that we're joined by Ivy Prosper. Ivy Prosper has over 15 years experience working in the media industry. She's an experienced TV host, producer, writer, and public speaker. She's the author of the book, Your Essential Guide on Moving to Ghana. Ivy has been monumental in helping to shape the narrative of Africa through her social media platforms, which include her YouTube channel, where she shares stories from Ghana. She's the social media manager of the Year of Return and Beyond the Return initiatives under Ghana's Tourism Authority, where she has been instrumental in connecting the global African diaspora with Ghana through digital media to promote tourism and connect with the history, culture, and experiences of Ghana. Her experience in Canada, the United States, and Ghana all empower her when communicating to diverse audiences. And last, but certainly not least, we have Lisa Che. Lisa is an emerging professional championing the strategic promotion and operation of World Heritage Sites through the lens of operation and hospitality management, innovation, and strategy. Lisa works to engage cross-cultural and cross-industry dialogues to champion new approaches to sustainable tourism practices. In 2020, Lisa worked at UNESCO's Education for Sustainable section, and in 2022 co-published CC UNESCO's Guide to Supporting Sustainability Practices in Tourist Accommodation Facilities. She placed first at the World Tourism Forum Lucerne 2020 Young Talent Program for her research on World Heritage Sites, how hotels can become agents to drive sustainable tourism. And she represented Canada at the 2021 World Heritage Young Professionals Forum. Lisa is currently working on a travel startup to promote travelers' emotional connection with a destination in the travel discovery and planning process. So I'm pleased to introduce our three speakers, and I would ask them to please turn on their cameras and join the panel. Great to see you, everyone. So I'm going to start with what is simultaneously, I think, a very simple question, but also an unbelievably complex question, which is, how would you define sustainable tourism within the context of World Heritage? How do you define sustainable tourism in your work? And I think to kick things off, I'll throw it to Fergus.
Thanks, Hillary, and glad to have my colleagues and friends, Ivy and Lisa, here on the panel as well. So glad to be here. You know, as you said, it's an important point in terms of what is sustainable tourism and how it's being perceived, and it's certainly in terms of, you know, the way we've seen tourism in the past, especially prior to 2019, where you had mass tourism and you had economic leakages from tourism in different communities. And other sort of aspects that are affecting the destination itself. There's a move more towards, you know, the environmental, social, and economic aspects of sustainability. But you could also say, especially in the case of World Heritage Sites, the sustainability is on the fourth pillar of sustainability, which is culture. And in many ways, one of the key elements, as evidenced by the UNESCO World Heritage Center Sustainable Tourism Program, and also through other initiatives that focuses on maintaining the OUV, or outstanding universal value, of the sites that are involved on a cultural and natural basis. So in that sense, when you're talking about sustainable tourism, there are those elements that touch on the three initial pillars of sustainability, but especially from reporting and from other initiatives and activities that are going on, it's really clear that one of the key sort of tenets of site managers, governments, organizations responsible for sites, they need to focus on maintaining the site's outstanding universal value.
Excellent point. Ivy, I'd like to throw it to you next if I can.
So when it comes to sustainable tourism in Ghana specifically, when I think about some of the heritage sites, or I think about some of the parks and national parks like Mole National Park, sustainability is creating an environment that will also make sure that those places are maintained despite the fact that there's a number of tourists coming in every day. So currently, the Ministry of Tourism is working towards making some upgrades and making sure that maintenance is done on the World Heritage Sites as well as other tourist sites, because in 2019, when we saw that there were over 1 million tourists that came to Ghana, that was something that was not expected as a result of the Year of Return campaign. And so going forward, after the pandemic eased up and people were starting to come in, that's when the Minister of Tourism toured around the country to make an assessment to see how all of the tourist sites were looking. Because the whole goal is not to allow these places to fall apart, because if they do, then you have an issue of the communities not having a sustainable income, because we want to make sure that the sites are maintained so people can have their livelihood, so that the economy is not affected or impacted because the sites are being visited so frequently. So maintenance of the sites, making sure that you make sure that the environment is also kept up, and making sure that the people in the community don't suffer any economic impact as a result.
Just as a very quick follow-up question, for those who might not be aware, would you mind just expanding quickly on the Year of Return campaign? What was involved in your role in the campaign?
Most certainly, most certainly. So for those who are not aware, the Year of Return was a campaign that Ghana initiated in 2019. And that was hinged on the 400-year anniversary, which is August 20th, 2019, which was 400 years from August 20th, 1619, which was the first date of a documented ship of enslaved Africans that arrived in the United States. And so the US had also put a bill, which was, I believe it was HR 1242, which was recognizing that particular date and that particular slave ship of enslaved Africans, and acknowledging the treatment of African Americans as a result of what happened during the transatlantic slave trade. Now, Ghana, recognizing that Ghana had the biggest number of slave forts and dungeons that housed a lot of the people who were taken through the transatlantic slave trade, acknowledged that fact and said, this is something that we need to acknowledge. And for those people who are what they call the historical diaspora, those are people who are African descent, but they don't necessarily know exactly where they came from because they were displaced through the transatlantic slave trade. So people were invited as a community to come and visit Ghana and come and learn some history. But beyond that, also learning about the culture and traditions and the heritage in Ghana itself. Now, what was initially started off as a campaign connecting with the African American community expanded beyond that, because a lot of people in the diaspora were like, well, we were also affected by it too, even though it wasn't acknowledging initially the South Americans and the Caribbeans, and because there were enslaved Africans taken there as well before the one in the US. So they expanded it, and that all people of African descent were invited to come and experience the culture and the heritage of Ghana. So some of the heritage sites in Ghana include some of the slave forts. So for example, Cape Coast Castle and Elmina Castle are two buildings that were major contributors in the transatlantic slave trade. So a lot of people of that history, when they come to Ghana, they want to see these forts because they know that's where their ancestors came through potentially. These forts are all over West Africa. There's some in Nigeria, there's some in Sierra Leone, like you can find them in other countries too, but the ones in Ghana tend to be maintained very well. And people tend to come to Ghana also because Ghana is known as a safe country. It's listed as the second safest country in Africa. So the Year of Return basically was acknowledging that 400-year anniversary. And so a lot of people took the call and came to the country. And what Ghana tourism did was, okay, so you've come to visit these sites, but that's not the only thing you're going to do. So now that you're there, what are some of the other things that you can do in the country? So we had these series of events and activities that were happening that people can come and partake in, and then also letting them know about all the other tourist sites and things that are happening in the country too.
Thank you so much. It's an incredible project, and I just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to learn about it. Lisa, how would you define sustainable tourism within a World Heritage context with your recent report with CC UNESCO? I know that this is something you've given a lot of thought to.
Thanks, Hilary. And yeah, I think CC UNESCO, the report was recently created. I co-author. I had the really honor role to have taken under Fergus's wing, and he has clearly been and really expert guiding me through the way. So in the context of sustainable tourism, the toolkit was really created as we really put together the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. We've taken them apart, and we looked at what Fergus previously mentioned, the 4 pillars of sustainability in the World Heritage context: the environmental, the social, the cultural, and the economic side. So environmental, we really looked into how do we ensure the landscape and natural or cultural heritage of specific sites can be maintained through serious activities, engaging stakeholders, engaging different factors that may play in hand, and social, such as ensuring jobs, securities, and wages are being pushed out. And in the culture context, the various factors of skills and heritage, how they can continue to be passed on within the lens of this accommodation operations. And obviously the last pillar, the economic pillar, ensuring that obviously economically there is enough money to sustain the protection and management, continued management of these sites. So we looked at various of these approaches and looked at specific examples, both in Canada and around the world, that were practicing well of.
Thank you so much. Fergus, I think I'm going to pivot back to you, because given the richness and breadth of your career, we've heard about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We've heard about the pillars that Lisa articulated so beautifully. I'm wondering if you could provide us with some context around how sustainable tourism has developed within a World Heritage context, maybe some history of the issue.
Sure. That's I won't take that as a comment on my age, so it's okay. That's but yeah, no, that's certainly I've experienced and I've seen a bit of the evolution that's taken place, and certainly, you know, in terms of the way that you look at sustainable tourism in the UN system, you know, it really goes back to the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992, when we started to discuss sustainable development issues. And, you know, tourism wasn't a main focal area, but it was, you know, you're starting to think of in terms of the impacts of what's being referred to now as the visitor economy on the local, regional, and national sort of levels. And so to that end, that's how things really started to evolve from that time, 1992. We had different factors like the UN Declaration on the Intangible Cultural Heritage in 2003. You had the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2008. But the big driver, and then after that, of course, you had international initiatives like the SDGs with the 3 tourism-related SDGs targets from 2015, as well as the International Year of Sustainable Tourism for Development in 2017. So lots of discussion and lots of dialogue on the overall sort of broad rubric of sustainable tourism. But at the same time, within the UNESCO World Heritage Center, my colleagues, Art Peterson and others who were there at the World Heritage Center, were really starting to focus on what sustainable tourism actually meant to the organization and the sites themselves. And this was in the early 2000s. And then around 2012, the United Nations Sustainable Tourism Program was established through my friend and colleague, Peter de Bruijn. And the intention was that over time, through periodic reporting, realizing how sites were being impacted by different aspects of tourism, whether it was demands on local water and energy resources, or economic leakage, or how the OUV was being protected. They made a deliberate and well sort of defined intention to create a series of documents and publications that were intended to help the management of various sites, both natural, cultural, and of course mixed as well. So in that sense, there has been that overall sort of global movement to support sustainable tourism and encourage sustainability. but specifically in terms of the work of the World Heritage Center and the sites themselves, especially prior to COVID in 2019, there has been a deliberate attempt by the World Heritage Center to really drive better sustainability, community benefit, and OEV maintenance at its now over 1,143 sites.
Yeah, I mean, it's anecdotal evidence for sure, but it really does seem to be an area that's accelerating. And
yes.
The history that you outlined, I think, evidences that. Lisa, I'm wondering if you have anything to add on, perhaps how this has been developing in any of the contexts in which you work.
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. And I think Fergus described the trend and the movement in a very holistic way. The only thing I would think of is that looking at some of the studies I've looked at was how the young people, so the millennials, are sort of engaging with the sustainability travel and sustainability tourism trend. And it is said that around 80 to 90% of millennials actually, they look for sustainability travel opportunities. But it is quite interesting that most of them also said that, reported that they don't know how to. So I think there is a great movement of, leading them hand in hand in both educating them about, the specific certification or destinations that they should look at, the specific factors that make a destination sustainable. But also, I think this poses as an opportunity for businesses to engage for more sustainable practices, because they know that in the next coming years, they will be this will be, type of their strategic competition in other words. So I think that is something that would be really complementary in terms of moving towards the sustainability, especially in the World Heritage aspect.
Thank you. Ivy, I feel like this dovetails really beautifully into your one of your many areas of expertise, especially when we're talking about sort of this educational aspect, this outreach aspect. How have you seen the push for sustainable tourism develop historically in your sector and in your work?
The interesting thing is in Ghana, and I feel like in the African context, a lot of people are so concerned with other issues that sometimes the things that are of priority to others are not a priority to them. So for example, you'll have somebody who will be talking about, eco-friendly tourism, finding things that people would do in other countries. Like, let's say if somebody's saying, I want a plastic straw, I don't want a plastic straw, I want a paper straw, like things that some people in those other environments are like, we're not thinking about that. Can you get us some electricity? Can you make sure we have water? So sometimes there's not that happy medium because there's needs that certain people have. But what I do see is that there's the push for making sure that certain places are not being disturbed. People are starting to talk more about gentrification is something that is definitely a concern in Ghana now. There's local people who feel like they're being pushed out because tourism is really increasing in Ghana. I believe it's now the third or fourth biggest driver of the economy. And so as more people continue to come, there is the creation of spaces to cater to the needs of people coming from Europe and coming from North America, whose needs are different than the needs of the people who are local. So the push for having a balance of not forcing people out of their communities is a major thing right now that's on discussion. And also prioritizing the greening of spaces, because I think what's happening now is we have, with growth, comes sacrificing environmental spaces. So somebody will be like, oh, the place is developing, we're seeing high-rise buildings. But the sacrifice of the high-rise buildings is that there's places that were land that were empty space with, land, grass, or whatever it may be, and now it's gone. So we're seeing the implementation of trees, things being planted into environments when they're building some of these new properties. People are discussing that more often. And then with eco, there's some lodges that are outside of the city of Accra that are opening up, and they're calling themselves eco lodges. There's one in the Volta region of Ghana that is called Meet Me There. And they have this process of their washrooms, the toilets are that operated in a way where it's like a self-composting kind of toilet. And so we're seeing those kinds of spaces opening up that are trying to cater to being in the environment and not causing any major issues, and offering sustainability in those ways. So that's what I'm seeing happening in Ghana specifically, yeah.
If it's all right, I'm going to stick with you for a minute, because given this incredible growth and this increase in tourism that Ghana is seeing, I'm just wondering if you could maybe reflect for us, given that this is a panel on World Heritage and sustainable tourism, what is unique? I mean, Ghana has incredible heritage resources. Is there anything unique in your mind in the relationship between World Heritage and sustainable tourism versus, say, a nationally recognized site or a locally recognized site?
Well, when it comes to heritage, that's something that is a really big part of Ghanaian life as far as culture goes. So one of the big draws is people wanting to see some of the cultural traditions. And I think that that is something that through tourism can be sustained. So it becomes sustained through tourism because people realize that, oh, people outside want to see this, because you have this dynamic of people who become, let's say, modernized to the Western society and saying, oh, we don't do that anymore. Oh, we don't do those kinds of dances, or we don't do this because we're educated. We have gotten a university degree. So let's leave that by the wayside. But then you see that people come and they're like, oh no, I want to see that. I want to see this. Well, what about that? What about this? Because one of the things we discovered in the year of return was people came and they were like, okay, great. We went to some parties, we went to some events, but what about the cultural traditions? We want to go to the rural community and see what are people doing. So what's happening is the culture, I believe, is what really connects with World Heritage as far as, being sustainable, because now you have young people learning things that they may not have wanted to because they felt like it was too old fashioned. So they're learning some of the old traditional dances so that when people come from on tour groups, they can come and see, oh, this is the type of dance you do. Oh, let me learn that too. Let me try and do this too. Or this is how you weave that fabric. Like some of the communities have said that the art of weaving the kente cloth could be lost because there's people not doing it as much as they used to. They move to the city, they want to get an office job, they don't want to be in the community weaving fabric because people feel like they're looked down on. So I think with the demand of people wanting to learn more about culture, those kinds of things can remain because there'll always be somebody who will continue the craft, continue doing the things that they need to do. So I think that some of the cultural aspects of the country are what will help with sustainable tourism in the cultural aspect, because that's one thing people love when they come to Ghana. We get people calling our office when they're coming. Usually celebrities usually ask for this. When they come and they'll contact our office, their team, that they want a cultural troupe to greet them at the airport. People have seen videos on social media that I've posted when, someone comes and there's a cultural group there, they're doing the drumming, they're doing the dancing. There was one year where there was the NAACP came, and there was about 250 people from the NAACP and their delegation that came. And we had 3 cultural troupes that were there performing. One of them was doing Northern region Ghanaian dance style. One was doing the Ashanti region style. So it's like each region has their own style of the way they do things. So people love that and gravitate towards it. So I think that the cultural aspect is what really will help to sustain that aspect in Ghana's tourism, part of the whole package of tourism in Ghana.
I'm so glad you corrected my architectural historian bias when I said site. And Fergus, I see that you
just to add what Ivy was saying, and Ivy, I fully agree with you. I mean, Kente is fabulous. I've got of course, I have my Kente right beside me, so I do have it not far, and there's all sorts of wonderful intangible cultural heritage, and I think that you're right. I mean, I saw the social media. My son's a big basketball fan, and he saw Dwayne Wade and with Gabriel Union and Accra last week, and they did the full ceremony, even gave them Ghanaian names, etc. So again, it's a fully enriched. I remember from the HACSA conference a few years ago, it was Africans in America. You're not Afro-Americans, you're Africans in America. So I like that sort of lens. But just to build on what Ivy was saying, from a sort of a structural standpoint, there are two World Heritage Sites in Ghana, the forts and castles, as Ivy mentioned, and also the traditional Ashanti architecture, which is to the north by Kumasi, which is the second largest city. And I think one of the key things that stands out is that forts and castles, it's one of UNESCO's first 25 World Heritage Sites. And again, to commemorate the solemn aspects of the slave trade, but it's also a serial site. And that means that there are a whole bunch of properties involved, and there are 28 properties involved in total. And I can tell you the ones that are closer to big urban centers, or that are bigger, or that have bigger representation, have greater degrees of sustainability because of the fact they have those degrees of visitation to support their maintenance, their upkeep, and the visitor economies around them, like Elmina, Cape Coast, Christiansburg at one time. Now Christiansburg is inaccessible, but that's one aspect of sustainability where there are those different elements that are there at the site, but only a few can really financially or otherwise support the local communities around them. So that's one aspect. And the same as with the Ashanti traditional buildings, where there's one that's near Kumasi, and that's actually, it's in a neighborhood. You drive up a road and there's a corner store, there's a cloth store, there are local residents, and all of a sudden there's this World Heritage Site that's like stuck in there as a neighborhood house, which is quite interesting. And it's because of its location and the community around it, it's well supported. But I do know from my work with the World Monuments Fund that there are, again, it's a serial site, and some of the other buildings that are not close to major urban centers are not as well sustained or supported. And in fact, they're in serious need of repair. So it's, there is that cultural connection that's there, especially the very strong and diverse cultural base that Ghana has. But at the same time, because these are serial sites, not everyone gets afforded the same sort of benefits or attention that other sites do within the overall rubric of the individual two World Heritage Sites there, and in other countries as well.
Yeah, that's very true. I just want to add to that. There's one in particular in the Volta region called Fort Prinzestein, and that one is in such decrepit condition right now because I believe it was in the 80s, it was submerged by the sea. So half of it is gone. And then the other half is still there, but it's not in good shape at all. So the other sites definitely need work and need some support. It's something that's been an ongoing conversation in Ghana about how to find the financial means to be able to support and repair and maintain some of the other locations.
Interesting. I think maybe not people on this call, but many would assume that with the visibility that World Heritage status gives, that maybe the sustainable tourism challenges would be slightly different. But Lisa, do you have anything to add in terms of the what might be unique in the relationship between World Heritage and sustainable tourism?
Yeah, thanks, Hillary. I think both Ivy and Fergus really outlined the key aspects, and particularly I agree with Ivy on what she mentioned as a cultural aspect that really stands out on these World Heritage Sites. And bringing back to Canada, an example I thought was really interesting was the Fairmount, located in the historic district of the Quebec Old Quebec World Heritage Sites. So I think with the cultural aspect, it comes with a lot of opportunities for experience, for as Ivy mentioned, and also for education, which is really what many people come to learn and experience from. And so the hotel at in the old Quebec, they started displaying historical artifacts really in the lobby as an immersive experience for the guests, and also for visitors can come in and to make this entire sort of their stay as an immersive experience. And they also provide, lobby guides to walk around and celebrate the cultural heritage of the property, because it is a World Heritage Site. And funny enough, during our research with Fergus, we found out in the 150th anniversary celebration of Canada's Confederation, they actually the hotel served the same dinner menu, a 6-course dinner menu. And they sourced it from the same sourcer, which was used 100 years ago. So it was a really unique culture experience, really tied up with the whole hotel and the destination and the cultural that was really embedded in the destination.
Fascinating. I'm actually going to throw a little bit of a curveball your guys' way, if that's all right, if I may do so, since we really wanted to foster some dialogue here with this panel format. And I see that one of our attendees, Jenny Buffalo, I believe, has their hand raised. And if they're comfortable, Stefan, I was wondering if you could turn the mic over to them so that they could ask their question. So talking should be permitted. So if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself. If not, you could also put your message in the Q&A box. And I encourage all of you to continue to do so throughout the panel. So Jenny, are you able to unmute? Just give it a few minutes. If not, we can always move on. But it's always great to hear from the floor. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. Okay, an accidental hand raise, it seems. Well, that's great. I will move on with the question that I selfishly and perhaps most excitedly want to ask is, I'm really hoping, I think when we talk about sustainability in tourism, we all too often can get a little caught in the doom and gloom. There can be a lot of negative statistics, a lot of sad tales. So I was wondering if each of you could share an example of excellence in sustainable tourism, something that you feel really exemplifies what you would like to see the sector doing as a whole. And perhaps Fergus, I'll start with you.
I might have more of a little bit of an interesting approach, but it's it's in the sense that my perspective sometimes is colored a little bit by controls or measures that are in place to control visitation. I think that there are 3 Canadian sites, Indigenous sites, in fact, that are really, reflexive and responsive to what I think is good management of the outstanding universal value and natural and cultural heritage considerations of a site. And those 3 are Sangwai, which is out on by what are Guayana, so they're also known as the Queen Charlotte Islands on BC. My most favoritely named World Heritage Site, Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump, and also Pimachuana Key. And the reason why I say that is the fact that Indigenous cultures, it's their land, it's their territory, and they're sensitive to the visitation that occurs there. And of course, as visitors to any site, let alone Indigenous sites, we need to be respectful of the people who live, work, and have their traditions, histories, and ancestry there as well. And I think that the aspect that has always impressed me is the level of management and oversight that occurs in these spaces. In the case of Sangwai, it's overseen by watchmen, but there are the group of local Haida trained elders and individuals who monitor and manage the site, but they also limit the number of people who can go there. So at that point, there's, in terms of environmental considerations, waste management, water use, et cetera, there's an element of control and management there that is in the hands of the local community. The same within Head Smashed in Southern Alberta. It's this beautiful built-in center on the edge of a buffalo jump kill site, where there's a limitation to where non-native visitors can go and access the site, which is managed by the local Piegan band. But beyond that, the land is separated. It's for the Indigenous band only, and they're very strict when it comes to managing that land for ceremonies and other activities. And finally, Pimachuanaki, which is on the border between Manitoba and Ontario, to the northwest of Winnipeg, northeast of Winnipeg, where there is a consideration that, they were very wary of taking on a World Heritage nomination, but at the same time, they wanted to do so in a way that they can control the visitation to the site, because the land is very important to the Anishinaabe peoples who are there, and they wanted to ensure that they would not be necessarily overwhelmed by numbers, but also the transformation of their culture, which can occur at the same time from this external visitation that occurs. So to me, it's, in part, it's because of those kinds of measures and the definitive steps that are taken by local communities to ensure that there is a cultural reinforcement, retrenchment that, has been able to sustain them over the times of their nomination.
To ask a quick follow-up question for those in the audience who might be involved in management in some way, these ideas of restricting access and sharing authority through governance structures, do you have any advice on how site managers, legislators might be able to implement these best practices in sites that they might be involved in?
Sure. I mean, 3 examples. I'm going to go halfway around the world to Europe, and the 3 examples there are Dubrovnik, Venice, and Ireland. And in the case of Dubrovnik, it's a historic city that has been damaged through conflict and wars, but they've always managed to rebuild. But the biggest challenge now is tourism. There's a little TV show a couple of years ago called Game of Thrones that you might have heard of. And Game of Thrones featured Dubrovnik as one of its key sites. And all of a sudden, you're getting huge hordes of people who are dressed up in their various suits and outfits. And there's Game of Thrones stores all over the place. And it was also featured in Star Wars. So, there's, again, big elements of visitation. But the big challenge there were the number of cruise ships. We'd have 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 passenger cruise ships that would be disgorging people into the city and really basically choking the visitor flows throughout. And the experience, the visitors there was really being diminished by these large numbers. So the mayor about 5 years ago made an active decision to say, look, only 4 cruise ships per day. We're putting a strict limit on it. And so in that sense, this was legislated and enforced by the mayor to ensure the sustainability of the site, but also, the visitation experience that people had, and most importantly, for the lives of the people who live there, but they weren't being constantly overwhelmed by, still, yes, there are large numbers of visitors, but not to the degree before. The same case in Venice. One of the things that they've been wrestling with is that Venice is certainly one of the huge tourism drivers in Italy. And, it's a lot of it is driven in part, again, by cruise ships. And the aspect of that is that they have decided to place a ticketing system. So within regard to that ticketing system, at either end of the older city leading into central Venice, this is something that they've struggled with for a while, but they've decided, we need to do something to generate revenue so that we can not only add to the revenues to support the maintenance of infrastructure and services, but also the fact that Venice itself has been impacted by climate change, particularly with the flooding that has affected St. Mark's Square and the properties around there. And so, bless you, Lisa. And so at the same time, it's one of those things where you really, need that kind of revenue to support it. And so they've taken that active step, and they've also placed I think it's a €5 tariff on each passenger coming off a cruise ship. So again, the revenues are there. How they're allocated, I hope they're being allocated well, but again, at least that's there for maintenance purposes. And the last one is a place called Skellig Michael, which is in Ireland, off the eastern shore of Ireland. And again, a little film operation called Star Wars came along, and what was once a very remote monastery, all of a sudden you're seeing hordes of small boats with people dressed up as Chewbacca or Imperial stormtroopers being driven across to get to the island. And it was just, again, something you don't expect, but that's the power of popular culture. And so to that end, what they've decided to do is to place a limitation on the numbers of visitors. So again, it's what it comes down to is assessing what the issue is, understanding the problem, seeing what the tools and mechanisms are, and implementing them and ensuring that they're enforced. That's, it's good public policy, good civil society, and hopefully at the end of the day, benefits the resource and the community as well.
Hear, hear. Lisa, I'll turn to you because, of course, we've just heard from Fergus about some of these very large scale, public policy initiatives. But I was also really intrigued by this idea of just displaying an artifact in an unexpected place. Such a small gesture that can have such a big impact. So I'd be really interested to hear what your example of sort of best practice might be.
Yeah, thank you, Hilary. I think Fergus went really well in depth into the examples, and it's obviously he's a really expert person in this field, and I totally resonate with him in terms of continuing and building onto the values that people would gain visiting an area, not from the quantity, but really from the quality, and really by restricting the access and limiting the number of people, perhaps there is a way of really exponentially grow that value for them and for the destination, and is a way to really control the region. I think in my own bias, examples, especially curated in the toolkit, I really enjoy looking at examples that empowers the community, empowers others. And I know, Hilary, you'll be going to Lunenburg in Nova Scotia, so congrats on that. So one of the examples we actually outlined in the toolkit was the Kolbach House, maybe I pronounce it correctly. So Kolbach House it's a guest house of very heritage significance, and on their website actually we found that the hotel really empowers local businesses. So they created on their own, curated a guide for tourists to visit, special gift shop that are owned locally, restaurants owned locally. So I think this directive effort really drive this added value chain that when they go to the house, they will be directed to spend further in local businesses. So that would really expand upon the value that's created locally.
Yeah, I have to say I'm really moved by this theme that seems to be emerging through the discussion of this idea from the global all the way down to the most small scale local initiative can really create a web of sort of sustainable tourism in a place and reaching out from a place. I think that's really interesting. Ivy, would you care to share with us an example of exemplary sustainable tourism practice?
I even forgot what your question was initially, so I'm glad that you repeated it, because I think Fergus went into so much detail that it was just, I was so fascinated by some of the things that he was sharing and talking about. In Ghana, as an example for something that I would say is exemplary would be how, it goes back to culture, how they've managed to be able to leverage culture as something that has helped people in communities to continue to sustain their culture and continue doing the things that were passed down from generation to generation and doesn't get lost, because they know that people want to see it and people want to experience it. So anytime you go to an event, it often starts off with a cultural dance troupe. So people know that people want to see that. I would say that's very exemplary. And then there's one that doesn't really get a lot of attention. There's a place in the Upper East region of Ghana that has they call it a Pikworo slave camp. And a lot of people only think about when the people were taken at the ocean on the ships and transported, but they don't think about the journey. And in the Upper East region, there is a community there that has a history that they've passed down from generation to generation of how people were taken in that community and enslaved and made to walk from there all the way down to the coast, while the European soldiers were on horses and taking them while they were walking all the way down. And in that community, they've seen over the years that there's people who travel and come up there to come and see and learn the history. But one of the things that I find fascinating is that they've taken DNA tests up there. Yes, there is somebody who's come and done some DNA tests, and they have discovered that they have some distant relative, descendants in the United States. And so now it's a matter of them connecting. So one of the things that I find exemplary is the way that some of these places are managing to connect with people who are like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years removed. I find that to be really fascinating because it shows the real connection of DNA, how people can really truly find out who they are. I also think that and it's not just because I work for Ghana Tourism Authority, but because even before I started working for Ghana Tourism Authority, I was already promoting about Ghana on my platform. And the Year of Return initiative started before I joined the team. And so I think it's very exemplary the way that they were able to connect with people around the world and be able to have such a huge response to coming to Ghana, because when people think of Africa, typically, traditionally, it's been they'll go to South Africa, they'll go to Kenya, they'll go to Morocco, they'll go to Egypt. Those are the places people think of. They want to see the pyramids. They want to go to Morocco for the, North African culture, which has a little bit of, Arabic influence. They want to go to South Africa to see the safaris or to see stuff about Mandela. They want to go to Kenya for safaris too, or they want to go to Tanzania to see the blue waters. And that's it. People don't think about the rest of Africa in the same capacity. So I think that what they did is they did something that's turned people's minds to the point where when they think of going to West Africa, they think of Ghana first before anywhere else. So they've done an exemplary job of marketing the country in a way that it has connected with people. And what people don't realize too is, and I'll explain for people who don't know that, I explained Year of Return in the beginning, but now it's switched over to Beyond the Return, which is the follow-up campaign. And this campaign is a 10-year initiative. And it's a 10-year initiative with the theme, A Decade of African Renaissance. So it's all about the renewal of Africa, the renewal of seeing what Africa is about. And there are 7 pillars that are the foundation of this campaign. And each of the things that we do as far as events and activities, something has to connect with one of these pillars. So those 7 pillars are Experience Ghana, which is the tourism aspect about experiencing things in the country, going to events, activities, festivals. Then there's Celebrate Ghana, which is about celebrating the cultural heritage and traditions. Then there's Brand Ghana, which is about finding ways to brand the country. Just like how you think of Paris, you think of the Eiffel Tower, they want to find a way that you can brand Ghana and think of something with Ghana. There's Invest in Ghana, which is encouraging people to make investments in the country, whether it's through partnering with a Ghanaian, whether it's starting your own business, whether it's importing, exporting, whatever it is. There's Give Back Ghana, which is finding activities that give back to the community. For example, there's a group of fraternities in the US who've come and they're commissioned boreholes across the country. Then there's, what's the other one? Diaspora Pathways to Ghana, which is connecting the diaspora community with Ghana. And then there's Promoting Pan-African Heritage and Innovation. And the promoting of Pan-African heritage and innovation includes the heritage sites. It includes promoting sites that people don't know much about, because people know about, a few main ones, but they don't know about some of the smaller ones around the country. So it's also about trying to promote other things that are happening around the country and other sites around the country besides the Cape Coast Castle and Elmina Castle and Independence Square and Black Star Square. So that's Beyond the Return in a nutshell.
That's fascinating. I love all these incredibly powerful, positive, all these incredible verbs, experience, invest, celebrate, innovate, give back. And you can feel free to decline to answer, but I have noticed that through a lot of your comments today, that of course, and in terms of those pillars, this idea of, you know, diasporic pathways, you know, Ghana does have an unbelievably rich culture and heritage, but also has a particularly difficult history. And I'm wondering if you could speak to, and I will certainly pivot to our other two panelists with this question as well, the relationship between sustainable tourism and difficult histories. There does seem to be an increased interest in sort of sites of consciousness, sites of return, sites of reflection, memorialization. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that piece in particular, considering your experience.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts as in if it's a negative thing or
well, do you feel that it requires unique strategies in comparison to other sort of sustainable tourism strategies? What's the relationship between these sites and tourism?
Right.
That relationship can sometimes be somewhat fraught.
Yeah, so with respect to a difficult history, yes, I agree that there has to be some sensitivities to it. So for me, myself, because I was born in Ghana, but I was raised in Canada, and I also lived in the US for a period of time as well. So I have an understanding of different viewpoints. So I think that was what made me successful in managing their digital campaign, because I was able to communicate effectively with all communities. So I think that goes back to an educational aspect, because I think what you have sometimes is a disconnect between the local community and the foreign community. So what we had a challenge with was, and I have often found myself having to have conversations with the local Ghanaian community who may be like, well, that's not our history because we're not the people who were taken. And then you'll have the people who come who are like, well, how do you not know about this? You live here. Because there's Ghanaians who live their whole life down the street from a slave dungeon and they've never been inside. They have no idea. They just know foreigners come and visit this place. You know, so, and I'm not saying that's everybody, but there's a large portion of people who have no interest in learning about that live in Ghana, and it's a lot of people coming from abroad. So it's finding that middle ground to be able to communicate to the local community, to have them understand, hey, this is part of the history. Just like in Canada, we have people in Canada who are insensitive to the Indigenous people and have no understanding of the Indigenous history. And you have to find a way to communicate to the local community that, hey, this is a part of this country's history. This is what happened. And this is what happened to these people. You have to have a balance of understanding in order to bridge the gap so that there can be some healing and some moving forward. I think that there's a responsibility there in trying to educate both sides so that there's a coming together. So in Ghana, I find myself trying to teach people who may not understand. So for instance, there were some kids who came into the dungeon when we were on a tour with a tour group, and they were walking home from school and decided to join us. They walked in, they were like, this is our first time. We were walking home from school and we walk by this every day. And today we decided to come in. And I was like, so join us on the tour. And so they joined us. These kids were not older than 12. There's 3 of them, between probably 8 and 12. And they were sitting there like, oh my God, this is what happened here? Because the tour guide is talking about the slave dungeon where people were brutalized. And they were like, what? This is what happened here? We didn't know. I'm going to go home and tell my parents because I don't think my parents know, you know? So I think taking the opportunity to show the locals and then letting the people who come, who are foreign, understand that, you know what, some of the locals have no idea. So that there's not a real disconnect where there can be friction between the two groups. So I think that when it comes to promoting a difficult history, there has to be ways to communicate it with a level of sensitivity of teaching. Like you have to be a patient teacher to be able to get some of these messages across to people. Otherwise you won't, because we can't ignore it. Because it existed and it happened. And as we saw, the people who tried to sweep it under the rug in Canada, the truth has come to light when the mass graves were found, so we can't bury it. We have to face it head on and confront it and talk about it, because it is part of world history that everybody needs to know about. So one of the things too is also making sure that there's not friction between groups, because what some tour guides have said is that when there's Caucasians who come in for the tour, and then there's African Americans who may come in and, with the brutal history of their ancestors, there's been people who've gotten into fights. People who've been like, why are you here? This isn't for you. It's your people that did this to us. And then people are like, well, it's not me. I want to learn about this. So it's finding that balance also to have those conversations in order to be able to understand each other, so, but difficult histories are definitely needed to discuss, because when I went to Poland many years ago, and it's the same thing. There's some things there that are brutal history as well that need to be confronted, and, people need to learn.
Yeah, very well said. Fergus, do you care to respond? I mean, especially given the examples you picked of sort of best practice, I'd be really interested to know your thoughts.
Sure. First off, thanks, Abby. It's a very good illustration of the underlying currents that are there in terms of the different ways of presenting sites and how people appreciate them, whether locally, regionally, or internationally. And it's not uniform, as you've ably shown. And one of the things that I remember in terms of visiting the major forts and castles is that, like in Poland, as I was saying with regard to Auschwitz, for example, it's always that visit to the gas chamber entries that really sort of, it's really affects people, because it's the realization of what that next step meant. And the same thing with the major forts, within the Forts and Castles World Heritage Site, you have the doors of no return. And again, I've seen a number of Africans living in America or the diaspora who come to these places, and there's that sort of sudden wave of realization that this was it. This is where I would not be returning to Africa. I would not be seeing my my family again, and they had no idea where they were going, what they were going to experience. And you can imagine the terror, the fear, the hardship, everything that was there. And it's not unusual to be by these doors of no return, which would basically be doors from the forts that would lead people to the ships, to the small boats. Sorry, that would lead people to the beaches. That would take them to the small boats that would take them out to the ships that were waiting offshore to take them to Brazil or the Caribbean or the United States. And so to that end, you would see people afterwards and they'd be shaken because of that difficult history that they were seeing writ large in front of them. So that was one aspect. But for me, I want to touch upon one other important element. And I think I can't tell you how strongly I feel about it, but, I realize we're talking about tourism, but in certain cases, particularly in places like forts and castles or Auschwitz or other concentration camps or elements, these are solemn places of commemoration. And too often I've been there where there's sort of a jollity, a frivolity, I'm on tour, etc. And it frustrates me because of the fact they're not understanding the dark or the deep message that this place is trying to convey. I've been in the slave dungeons of Zanzibar, and I've seen the tour groups going through there, and it's like, frat boys or young people, not just young people, older people also on tour. And, sorry, but it's not that kind of place. This is not a theme park. This is not something that, it's just another aspect of your tour. It has a deeper, more symbolic meaning. And I think this is something, that there's an element. And I'd like to add in one last thing that sort of, there was this, talking about the solemn commemoration side. But I know that, as Ivy has said, we're trying to be a long-term process, trying to deal with, residential schools and the fallout and the tragedy and the loss of our Indigenous peoples that they're seeing, what they've known, but now is fully revealed to those outside of their own communities and their places where they live. But again, there's also other elements like there's the Rocky Mountain Parks World Heritage Site, which again has Indigenous elements to it. But there's also the elements of the fact that about 35 years ago, Parks made a decision that they really wanted to convey the history of the park. Banff National Park in particular, and the fact that much of it was built by Ukrainian prisoners of war in the World War I, when they were deemed as fifth columnists, or people who might be working against the country in one way or another. And for the longest time, it was, the Swiss Guides, it was building of all these lodges, the building of the railway, the last spike in Craigalackie in BC. All those elements were sort of building this mythology of Canadian history. Now, when you go to places like Cave and Basin or Highway 1A or other places, you're seeing memorials and interpretation that say, yes, we have this wonderful natural resource. It is a World Heritage Site, and they have this various elements, Indigenous, cultural heritage, and other aspects to it. But at the same time, this is part of its history, and it's not a positive, and it's a dark element. But we're willing to put it out there because, it's the reality of how this place was constructed and the place that you are now enjoying. So I think, places are struggling. But if I can say two things, it's that, some places really are needing more respect and solemnity. In other cases, we're starting to struggle or grapple with what those difficult histories are and how we can interpret them. Because again, you're trying to be fair and reasonable in terms of how the site is being best represented.
Thank you so much. Lisa, any thoughts, anything to add?
Yeah, not much to add, except that I think that these, history in general, let it be, positive or negative, it gives us a portal into the clues of our past, right? So in the context of heritage, culture, it's a window for us to also really see the future, that how we can change what we have now with the portal of information from the past into future. So I think, as Ivy and Fergus both mentioned, really educating the visitors when they come about to, let them understand the significance of that culture, and then use that as a way to support and guide behaviors, so then they can understand that aspect of the key elements of, what would go down the road if we continue a specific way. I think that's the beauty of it, and especially in the World Heritage Sites context, we have the both cultural and the natural heritage that can really go both ways. If we in the cultural heritage, we want to embrace what we had, and then in the natural sites, we don't want to see, for instance, global warming really impacting these areas, because we do actually see much of that that changes in our environment. So I think it provides us a very good educational, place for us to learn more about our past, our present, and the future.
I'm so glad that you brought us back to this point of the future. And I will just remind everyone again to please drop your questions in the Q&A box, and I'm happy to pose them for you. But again, I'm so glad you brought up this idea of the future and this idea of sort of looking forward, but as well some of the impacts that we're currently seeing at these, universally important places and cultural expressions as well, of course. And I'm wondering if you might kick us off, Lisa, on what you feel are the most significant challenges to World Heritage sustainable tourism moving forward, sort of thinking towards the future, but also what we can do to meet these challenges together as the heritage sector writ large.
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. Well, to my very humble opinion, I think that to ensure that the sustainability of these sites, we have to really enable the participation of all actors that are involved. So we need to really balance the return also, of all stakeholders for them to leverage their participation rate and securing a more sustainable action on their side. I think from my view, really balancing this sustainable heritage is looking at a specific destination as a family. So we see that there is the home, which is where the sites, which is where the cultural heritage is and how it embraces us, it shelters us and it educates us. And we see the parents who are sort of the regulators, the experts like Ferguson and Ivy, who really, teaches what is the right direction to go in terms of securing this home and ensuring the peace in this home. And then the kids who are like the toddlers or probably in their teenage years, they're like the other actors. So they're like the companies, they are the ones that are involved in managing the sites, who need to learn about the standards that are rolled out, the specific boundaries that need to be set in place, and what to do, what not to do to sort of secure that. And as this sort of family roll along and sustain itself, there'll be others who will join and become this whole part of community. So it really encourage the participation of all actors to educate, to participate, and to be more involved in the discussion, the dialogue, the formation of this whole community of sustainable tourism activities.
Thank you so much. That's a really powerful and beautiful sort of analogy, and just a really interesting way to think of it. Ivy, I know that you have limited time to share with us today, and you've already been overly generous with your time, but are you able to just answer this question before I let you go?
Sure.
Thank you so much. So what do you think are the most significant challenges facing sustainable in regards to sustainable tourism moving forward, and how we might meet them?
I think the most biggest challenge is money. Straight to and simple. That's the biggest challenge. Some countries have more money than others, have access to more money. Some countries are prioritized over others. So speaking from the point of a developing nation, I think that the biggest challenges are financial access, as well as resources available to be able to do the things that you need to do, some of the tools, because sometimes I'll see renovations being done somewhere, and the tools they're using to do those renovations are not the same tools I would see someone in Canada using to make renovations. Like if somebody's building a home, when they're building a home in Canada, they're using different tools than they're using to build the home in Ghana, different techniques. So I think that the biggest challenge for developing nations in particular is access to resources, access to finances, as well as whether they're prioritized or not. Because you may be listed as a World Heritage Site, but you may be seen as a least priority compared to something else. If there's a World Heritage Site in Paris, France, a lot of people are going to prioritize Paris, France before they're going to prioritize Accra, Ghana. Unfortunately, that's the case. So I think that developing countries face the challenge of being prioritized if people see value in what they need to be done and coming on board to support. So money, resources, and being prioritized or not, and infrastructure. Those are the things that I think are major challenges for developing nations in particular when it comes to sustainable tourism.
Yeah, really interesting, and a great reminder that, this idea of universally equitable challenges is, sort of a red herring. Fergus, your thoughts?
Before he starts, I'm gonna just, I do have to leave because I do have a call I have to jump on. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I appreciate being here today. And thank you, Fergus, for asking me to be part of this.
Well, thank you for joining us, Abby, and safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hillary, for the question. Thanks again for Ivy's participation. It's great we had all four of us here being able to take part. I actually have two things, and one is that Ivy is right. It's money is always going to be the big issue, and whether we're in the NGO field or whether you're in government or whether you're private sector or personal life, especially any number of dimensions, there'll never be enough in terms of what we're aspiring to or what our expectations are versus what can realistically be done. I just wanted to point out three things. One is that there is a recent study that was done on Africa by Nature magazine in I think it was earlier this spring or last fall. Sorry, it's just time is pretty fluid after COVID. But there was a dimension that many of the natural and cultural sites are on the coastlines. So we're talking about, I think, around 250 plus in total. And many of these are, to different degrees, being impacted by climate change. And many of these, especially in the case of, say, for example, the forts and castles that Ivy mentioned in Ghana, Elmina and Cape Coast are right on the coastline. When I was there this summer in August, they had already begun a process of armoring the coastline against the eastern shore of the Atlantic. So they had put up jetties that were, huge concrete and stone structures to try and to protect the eroding coastlines, because you're really starting to see a loss or diminishment there. The same as, it's occurring in Saint Louis in Senegal. It's occurring on Ile de Gorée, that's there as well, and other coastal sites. And, what happens is that, particularly for countries that are basing a lot of their tourism on these destinations, you're starting to see really, serious concerns in terms of the environmental impacts and the devastation of things like climate change that we're hearing about at COP27 right now in Sharm el-Sheikh. And certainly for a number of these sites, countries are going to have to start making really serious decisions. Seas are advancing, they are rising. There's only so much money to go around. As Ivy was mentioning, heritage sometimes is not always a priority when it comes to potable water, electrical grid, jobs, economy. And, you start making choices. And you start making choices of, what kind of sites you can maintain or retain. And it's the same with natural sites, where there have been serious drought issues in South Africa, in Kenya, and other places where you're starting to lose that sort of charismatic wildlife that are there in protected areas and World Heritage sites like Serengeti, or in Ngorongoro in Tanzania, or other places like the Masai Mara in Kenya, and other places that are in South Africa as well, where you're starting to have serious concerns about the status of the biodiversity there and how it's being impacted by climate change. So again, money is there, policy is there, structure is there, but it's really important to realize that money itself will not be able to resolve these problems, and it will not be able to do so. And we're gonna have to make some serious choices, particularly for places where countries have invested a lot for the amenities, the services, the infrastructure, to support tourism there as one of the key elements of their visitor economy and their overall contribution to the national economy. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is actually good news, and Lisa doesn't know this yet, which is good, is that I was in Bangkok 2 weeks ago, and I was at the ICOMOS Annual General Assembly there, where we presented our International Cultural Heritage Tourism Charter. And so this was an update, third update of the charter that began in 76, 99, and now 2022. We'd updated it to reflect the changes that are occurring in the cultural tourism field, especially those related to sustainability, particularly those elements of environmental, community, sustainable development goals, other aspects, as well as, of course, climate change. So it's a charter that reflects what's gone on in the case of the SDGs, Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Tangible Cultural Heritage, but also looking forward in terms of the planning, the destination management, and the other impacts that, government authorities, whether you're in Lunenburg, whether you're in another community elsewhere around the world or an Indigenous community, those elements that can serve as a foundation or fundamental elements for your planning. And I just found out 4 hours ago that it has been approved. So as a result, we have a brand new cultural heritage tourism charter that's there available on site. The great thing is that it's accessible, not only in terms of a document, but we've also translated it into 8 languages and counting. And so we've been trying to do our best to try and ensure that it's as accessible and usable by communities and sites that are looking forward when it comes to really trying to take a more modern communal, direct approach to supporting and maintaining their cultural heritage resources.
Well, congratulations. That is quite an achievement. And I have no doubt that everyone is going to be rushing.
It was 5 years. It was 5 years in the making. So I'll tell you, it took a while, but it was
not a quick process. No, and you know, the charters, I think, are just so powerful because they represent such a beautiful coming together of the sector, you know, and in a really powerful way. I'll ask one last question. Of course, feel free to sort of take your final statements wherever you would like to take them. And of course, I mean, this announcement is just an incredible way to end a session like this, and a surprise to me as well. So thank you. But you mentioned infrastructure, investment, change, the change that we're facing today. And in some ways, I think that this panel is an interesting example because, of course, we're here online. You know, we're not together. And you talk about needing to make hard decisions. I think, you know, many site managers, all of us really have had to make some very tough decisions over the last couple of years with the global health crisis. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the relationship between, say, sustainable tourism, World Heritage, and, you know, digitization initiatives, sort of the disruption that we have seen in travel in the past couple of years, and maybe what lessons we can learn moving forward. Again, trying to sort of end the session on, you know, that looking to the future. Yeah.
You've hit something right into Lisa and my wheelhouse. So this is something that we've been talking about, and certainly, Lisa, do you want to start, or should I start, and then you can discuss what you're doing as well?
No, I'm happy that you start first. You kick off.
Okay. Okay. So a good friend of mine who I met for the first time after 3 years of knowing him digitally, I met him in Bangkok for the first time, and we're very good friends. Despite the distance and the just screen-to-screen connection. He's developed a program called Aug Traveler. And basically Aug Traveler is an augmented reality tool that you can use, download on your phone. So the interesting thing that his name is Pankaj, and what Pankaj has done is that he has basically digitized the elements of India's cultural heritage sites. You can think of the Red Fort, you can think of the Taj Mahal, you can think of Jantar Mantar, all the other, you know, unique cultural sites in India that India has, and he's done 4 things. He's basically done it so that if you want to visit a site beforehand, you can actually go there, you can see an element, and you can look at it from a 360-degree view. You can even bring that cultural heritage element virtually to your screen if you're in your room somewhere where you can actually examine it as an architect or an art history student or whatever. So it's a really unique sort of representation. You can also use it as a tool when you're there at the site itself, so you can walk around. And because varying countries have varying degrees of interpretation, it gives you that well-established, validated, high-quality interpretation. So you pointed out an element and right away you know its history and its background. And it's, you know, not someone telling you one thing and someone telling you something else. So there's actual sort of validation. And not only that, but there are links to how that, if it's intangible cultural heritage, how it was made and the background to it as well. The third element is that he's tied to educational partners, Macmillan Education, for example, where they have school books that are tied to the site, to the app, that are then used in over 10,000 educational institutions in India. So you learn about the cultural heritage from either being there or actually, you know, the school tours that are very popular World Heritage sites, as you know. And so there's a gamification element that he's built into it as well. So it's not just, oh, you know, here and there's another site, here's another temple, but it's almost something like Pokemon Go. So there's an element where you actually look for things, and so that draws people further and further into the site. And the fourth and last element from a sustainability standpoint is that in and around these sites, so these venues, there are all sorts of traditional activities, you know, brass making, weaving, arts events, other activities. Many of them either, you know, not well supported or well sustained, and a lot of tourists might end up going to the local McDonald's or Starbucks, or go to the commonly popular places, international style places. But what it does is that it highlights along the way, this is a traditional brass maker. This is a way that they make their products. So there's an actual video that's there, and it will lead you directly to that place, and you can get a sense of what the different products are. And so he's built that up as a digital marketplace in and around these World Heritage Sites, to the point that he's now partnered with TripAdvisor. So TripAdvisor connects to his app, so you can see the World Heritage Site, but you can also see the activities that are around it that give you that full sort of enriching, tangible and intangible cultural heritage experience. And just to add on to that, over the past 2 years of COVID, now I guess 2.5, the World Tourism Organization has really tried to reinforce over and over again that digital is the way to go for a number of destinations, particularly when people can either not travel there or to get a more sort of richer, fuller understanding of that place. So again, you're starting to see that with a number of sites, not just in India, but elsewhere around the world, that are starting to drive a better understanding of these venues. And just the last point is that I saw a virtual tour of the pyramids that a team from Harvard had created. So while you can see the pyramids while you're at Sharm el Sheikh, you can actually look at your phone and walk around the interior of the pyramid without going into it. So all these things are there. All these things are providing a more richer, informed experience to visitors that, it's not just, I've seen it, I've done the Insta photo by the big sign, I've put my pre-signed figures out there. I can actually contribute to the local economy and reduce the economic leakage.
Incredible. And just so that our audience knows, we are dropping links to some of these projects in the chat for you, so you can feel free to save those and look into them. So Lisa, I'll turn it to you for the final word of today's panel.
Thanks, Hilary. I just wanted to say that I'm a big fan of Fergus's friends, Og Traveler. He's mentioned to me many times about the project, and it seems like it's a very great way to have an immersive experience. The gamification is also an aspect that really engages with users. I think in my experience, seeing COVID has changed the way we travel, but also looking at how it's changed like the Gen Zs, the way that they interact online. I think it's both a risk, but also poses an opportunity to sort of heighten the conversation about sustainability, the continued heritage management of these sites. So that's what part of the project I'm working on is looking at, how do we emotionally connect with some things, and how do we drive that connection, seeing what we learn or we study or what we see online, drive that into the more physical terms. And I think with this sort of digital transformation we see, especially in the tourism sector, there is a lot of ways we can collect data and use this to in turn analyze how we can further engage. So there's the digital twins that can be created with destinations. I know that airports are using them to sort of predict using AIs how specific instance could be if we change, like, let's say, a number of people during which hour that they arrive. So it provides this like really unique tool that we never really seen before to help us manage and better predict outcomes without having to really take a toll on the destination. So I think that's a really powerful tool and transition that we can definitely leverage in these in especially tourism industry, and to use it wonderfully. And I just want to thank Fergus once again for really taking under your wing and really inspiring me along this journey as such a great expert. And I know that you put so much hours of work in the congratulations on the work that your team has done. And I want to thank CC UNESCO, especially Ellie, for inviting me to the panel today and to be able to interact with such great audience and the experts that are present today.
Yeah, it's been my honor, and don't let those are fine words, but you should know how hard Lisa works, and it's been an honor supporting her because she's done great things in terms of the short space that we've had together. And also, you know, it's there's opportunity for all kinds of younger professionals who are there, emerging professionals. And I know this is something else just to sort of put a plug in at the end. The reason why I mentioned Lisa in advance of the charter is that she's one of our emerging professionals within my scientific committee, the International Cultural Tourism Committee. And, you know, we're always looking for strong contributors. We're fortunate to have Lisa, but there are others who we certainly welcome to do so. And if you have young professionals who are interested or in the field and want to be joining the ICTC, Stefan can throw in the link if he can below. We're probably the best ECOMOS committees, so that's just the way it is. But you know, it's an engaging group of professionals. We do interesting work, and certainly now moving forward, as I was saying earlier, you know, we're talking about the past and the present, but it's really the future that we have to look forward to. And really, in terms of the tools, as Lisa mentioned, with digitization, the use of data, and other ways of viewing and experiencing and understanding these different sites, it's evolving, and it will continue to evolve. And it'll be in the hands eventually of younger professionals. So you're most welcome to join us, and we look forward to having you connect if you can.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to you both for your time and for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us. And of course, Ivy isn't here with us, but still many thanks to her for sharing her time as well, especially during a very busy time at the moment. And with that, this concludes our session this morning. So again, thank you, especially to Fergus for taking such a lead on organizing this panel. Thank you to all the organizers. With that, I will turn it over to Stefan, ICOMOS Canada's Executive Director, just to see if he has any final housekeeping before we turn our attention to the next session.
Thank you very much, Hilary. And again, thank you, Fergus and Lisa, for this very fascinating and engaging discussion. Just a heads up to our guests, our next session is in an hour and a half. We have a full day today of 3 sessions, and our next session is on World Heritage and Decolonization. So we'll be connecting a lot of the points, but we're very excited for that. So go have lunch if you're in the Eastern time zone, and please do join us at 1 p.m. Eastern very soon. As well, and a few of you contacted me asking if the session is recorded. It is available on the event portal on Eventbrite. And so if you have any colleagues that you think would find this interesting, please do forward the session. They will have to register, but once they register, they'll have access to all the sessions. So thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in an hour and a half. Take care.
Merci, Stefan.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
See you,
See you, Fergus.